Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Wolfgang Schulze, and I'm responsible for Red Hat's storage consulting team. So in this session, we are going to do a discovery whether or not software-defined scale-out storage is something that you should be looking at that is relevant for your organization. And then we are going to look into what steps can you do in order to get there. So a little agenda. We are going to do some interactive questioning in the beginning.
Once again, please join us at the Partner Pavilion Theater. The latest presentation, Cloud Development with Eclipse.
No, this is the latest presentation. Damn.
OpenShift.
Okay, was that it? The
Presented
voice?
by Brad McNeil, COO. Sponsored by CodeMD.
It makes no sense trying to talk against the voice of God. You just let him finish. Yeah. So we are going to analyze what we can do with you and with your team to make you successful. And we see that some have already done it, and I'm going to give you some examples how that went. Next slide. So the first thing when I get invited to talk with customers who are trying to get into this, when we do a discovery session, usually in a one-on-one situation, is I ask them questions. And these questions, I have put them here up on the whiteboard. What I would like to do is I'm going to ask all of you about your particular experience in your organization. And there's 4 options for each question. And please raise your hand whenever you feel that this most adequately describes your organization. So, total expenditure for storage in your organization, is it less than 500K? How many? One, okay. Two. Between 500K and 5 million? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Between 5 million and 10 million? 1. More than 10 million? 1, 2, 3, 4. Excellent, very good. Now let's look at your overall application landscape. If you are a small company, then probably you have fewer applications. If you are a multinational bank, you have thousands. So the number of distinct applications in your organization, is it smaller than 50? 1, 2. Between 50 and 500? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Between 500 and 2,000? 1, 2, 3, 4. And more than 2,000? Oh, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just out of curiosity, those of you who said more than 2,000, which companies do you represent? State Street Bank, yeah, in Boston, right? Excellent. In terms of the total installed capacity that you run throughout your organization, live storage that is, let alone not tape and offline stuff. How much capacity are we talking about in your organization? Less than 100 terabytes? 1, 2. Between 100 and 1 petabyte? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Between 1 petabyte and 10 petabytes? 1, 2. Nobody on this side? Okay. More than 10 petabytes? Ah, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Awesome. So we can already see that there's actually quite a number of people who run very large organizations and large-scale implementations. Usually what you see in the storage landscape is that this has been built over decades. And you will usually at State Street Bank, you will run not just one particular technology, but a whole zoo of different generations of technologies. But it just gives you a good understanding about the scale that we are talking about and for what type of situations the software is going to be relevant. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at what is your need. Is this really something that you should invest in and that will fit your organization? Next slide. And first I asked you for your feedback and for your numbers, and now I'm going to share some numbers with you. This is actually from a study that Red Hat commissioned with a company that does this type of user surveys. And they asked IT decision makers how they feel about their current storage implementation and whether they feel that they have something that is adequate for their current needs. And 38% of those people said it's totally inadequate. So every third of you, I would imagine, from a statistical perspective, is currently unhappy with their storage implementation. Next. It's even worse when you ask the question about future workloads. And we are all dealing with future workloads. We have people who have suddenly to deal with data from sensors, from more and more resolution, from microscopes, from video feeds. All of that leads to an enormous rise in capacity and throughput requirements. And 70% of those people said that they are very uncomfortable. They don't think that their current storage infrastructure can handle it. So you should ask yourself that question. Are you part of those 70%? If so, then you have a need. You need to look at new implementations and new technology. And 98% think that a more agile storage implementation can actually hugely benefit the organization. So I hope that by the end of this presentation you may feel the same, that this is something that you should look at. Next slide. So the business drivers are that data growth exceeds 40% in many enterprises. So every year you have to install more and more capacity, whether you like it or not. Your users, your lines of business, they will produce more and more stuff. They have cell phones, they have devices that produce a flood of data that you need to store. And that goes across all industries. Your thermostat in your home produces a continuous stream of data. That's one, but we have millions of those. There may be companies that are interested in that, but it needs to be stored somewhere. So that year-over-year growth is really an enormous challenge for all of us. And that is why storage in most companies is among the top 3 spending categories. That's where the money goes. And that's where are they? I don't see the sign. Some of these other vendors make a lot of money and have done that over the last decades. And we are going to change that. I think you will agree with me by the end of that presentation. The thing is that these, what we call legacy storage vendors, they will sell you a proprietary appliance. An appliance because it contains everything. It's all in the box. What happens inside is none of your business. And when you want to replace them, when you need more capacity, all you can do is you do a forklift upgrade. That means you take out the old box and you put in a new box that has 2 or 3 times the old capacity, which then puts you at the challenge that you need to move the data from your old system into the new one. And you operate both of them at the same time. You need to do expensive migrations. And that is pretty much a model of the past. If you can have a scale-out technology that can grow continuously instead of that big one-to-one replacement. Many of the users feel hostage by their legacy vendors of these appliances. And I'm not going to disclose that with your peers here in the audience, but I suspect that some of you who actually spend millions and millions each year, they may share that feeling. Because there's nowhere for you to go. This is such a lock-in situation. Your users are so locked into that ecosystem because they have been trained and they are comfortable with this solution that it's very hard to get them out of that. So whatever they charge you each year, you probably have to pay it. You can maybe negotiate a little discount, but that's about it. You cannot really go somewhere entirely different. So that's why many are frustrated about that situation and are looking for a way to get out of that. And if you have been here since yesterday, all you hear about is cloud and containers and new workloads. And once again, these legacy storage implementations are not really ready for that. They were built at a time and designed for use cases that don't fit. It's totally different. This is not the way that the big cloud companies, Google or Facebook and Amazon are doing storage. Their implementation is entirely different. Next slide. So I've talked about this closed system that is called an appliance. So you can think that there's a casing around this. And the only way in are these externally visible interfaces for management, and then your data, your applications consume the storage through NFS, SMB, or iSCSI endpoints. And then there's a layer of proprietary software that handles all of that. But at the end of the day, if you actually take a screwdriver and look what is inside, it's standard disks. It's these disks you can buy from Western Digital, Seagate, and you name it. And they just make it more expensive by putting this system of value add around it. So for some users, this is actually fine because they don't have to worry about it. They just put the box and never worry about it again, and they just keep paying. That's fine. But for those of you who are concerned about costs and the constant pressure from the business, that may not be a sustainable model if you need to keep growing. And of course, they can afford that pricing premium because they know they have you. They have you. So there's no way for you to go elsewhere. And in the long run, that is probably difficult to sustain. Next slide. What we have seen over the last couple of years is the new players in the storage market. The fastest growing segment of storage budgets is actually cloud, public cloud storage. When Amazon entered the field, this was something that was unheard of, and it was new, but it got adopted very, very quickly because it is such an attractive proposition. And it is a little better than the previous model, because you see that at least that entirely proprietary implementation now contains a little bit of open stuff. Little Linux is part of that. But at the end of the day, you don't get to see that once again, because you are just using and consuming that storage through public APIs. And what actually happens inside a Google or an Amazon or a Facebook data center is none of your business, really. They may or may not share it. So it is still proprietary. And of course, even more so, all of the hardware is extremely standardized. They buy really tens of thousands of relatively inexpensive pieces of hardware, which can be easily replaced one by one. If it fails, they just put in a new one. So the point here is, this is a step forward, but it certainly is not the answer for everything. It's a great model for small startup businesses and for certain types of applications, but I'm sure our colleagues from State Street Bank will not put customer data in the public cloud. So there is still a use case and a reason to maintain your own data center and to keep something on premise. So it's not the final solution. We have something better. Next slide. But the changes that we see here in this domain are really similar to what you can observe throughout the IT industry. And there's a general trend to go from unwieldy big things into decomposing those and making them fine-grained and easy and easier to deploy and more dynamic to deploy. Let's just go through that exercise. For development methodology you have in the old age, you have the waterfall model. Nobody does that anymore. Currently we do DevOps, much more flexible, much faster iterations, much more dynamic interactions. From an application architecture perspective, the time of the monolith, where huge applications were developed in COBOL and ran somewhere on a mainframe, is definitely over. So over the years, we have learned how to decompose those into service-oriented architectures, and now, of course, all the rage is about microservices. And you can already see the trend of that decomposition. The same, we used to deploy everything on a dedicated box. I've worked in the financial industry in New York not so long ago. About every bank had the same model. They would buy gold-plated servers and put application after application on those. And of course, the storage underneath was a database, because that was the best they could find. So they invested the money and paid Oracle for a license for that on a very expensive storage array. So nobody does that anymore. Now we have containers, which make our world as developers so much easier, because we can flexibly deploy and move things around, and gives so much more dynamic behavior. Data center, of course, also went from central mainframe implementation through a phase where things were hosted, and now it's all hybrid cloud model. You can deploy part here, you can switch back and forth and fail over from one vendor to the other. And now we see the same thing happening with storage. We had the initial idea of a big appliance that was just one big unit. We had a step in between that we called scale-out storage, where instead of that replacement, you can just keep adding additional storage devices, and you have a smart piece of software that actually spreads and balances your data across all of these storage devices. So that's the difference between scale-up and scale-out storage. In the case of the technology that we are going to talk about later, you can just add additional hard drives, and every time you do that, it gets recognized by the system, and automatically the data will be rebalanced from existing devices onto that new device. You don't have to worry about it, really. And the same elastic effect also happens the other way around. Excuse me. When you remove a device, it will also rebalance and fix itself, and again establish a solid state. Next question. So I promised you we would actually take a look at whether this actually is a good fit for you. So we are going to go through some more questions. So the first question is, what do you in your organization have as year-over-year growth? Just a rough estimate. Do you think that the capacity growth in your organization is less than 5%? Anyone? Show of hands. Nobody less than 5%. I'm going to make this a point. It's 0. 5% to 10%. Anyone? 1, 2, 3, 4. 10% to 30%. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. And more than 30%. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So it's actually a pretty good validation of the statistics that our researchers found, that the vast majority in our audience here, you see dramatic increases year over year. We need to handle that. In order to gauge whether you are ready for technology such as Gluster or Ceph, the next question is very relevant. And the next question is, what is your organization's familiarity with Linux? And that reason is relevant because if you are a complete Linux, a Windows shop, and you don't know how to spell Linux, it will be very hard, and you will have a hard time. It's not as easy as just to install a little piece of software. It is much more involved. So, again, by show of hands, familiarity with Linux? None. You can be honest, we won't tell anyone. Nobody? Okay. Oh, I like that. Barely. 1. Mixed bag. You have some experts and some who are not. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And those who are totally bought into it and totally love it and gurus. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16 or something. Awesome. I wouldn't expect anything less on this event. So wonderful. If that is the case, you are in good shape. But nevertheless, you will still need to learn a little. And last question. We talked about containers before and all these other technologies. Are you currently adopting and looking at containers? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is very popular. DevOps, I almost don't want to ask. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 16. Microservices, that may be fewer. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hybrid cloud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11. Awesome. For all of these workloads, the storage technologies that we will talk about are very suitable, and your skills are going to matter because you can combine these two. And let's now finally start looking into that. The two technologies that Red Hat has are Red Hat Gluster storage and Red Hat Ceph storage. Those are the downstream releases, the maintained, supported releases of the of course, of the open source upstream packages that you can also get. This is a map of a universe of different workloads. So there are different dimensions. Unfortunately, it's not showing. There's actually a little arrow going into all of these 4 dimensions. So on the left-hand side, you have traditional workloads. On the right-hand side, you have next-generation type workloads. And on the top, you have workloads that are more focused on performance, whereas on the lower part, you have application workloads that are more focused on capacity. And what you see on this slide is how these two products, Gluster is the light yellow and Ceph is the orange color, how they align with these different workloads. And this is relevant because a lot of time people ask like, oh, you have these two products, they overlap, where do I use one versus the other? Can you help me make a decision? And sometimes the decision is very difficult because you can tell there's kind of mixed situations where you can use one or the other. And there's other cases where it's really a slam dunk for one technology versus the other. So if you are, for example, trying to build out a large-scale object storage, kind of an internal Amazon S3 competitor on your premises, then of course this is a clear situation for Ceph, and it therefore has this dark orange color. If you want to implement a small media repository, let's say for video files, and that you want to share as a POSIX-compliant file system, then it's a yellow for Gluster, so this is a much better fit in this case. And by all means, there are cases where both of these are not yet mature enough, or at least not yet in the year 2017. So we would have to talk about each particular use case separately with you if you wanted to go into HPC or use it as an underlying storage for relational database systems. So I'm going to shut up for about 30 seconds so that you can think about your situation and how you fit into that picture. There's a question.
Yeah, the private cloud. What do you feel on that?
The private cloud?
Yeah.
It depends what sort of workload you want to put on the private cloud.
Okay, so it will be the same analogy. It will be the same thinking, and if I'm going on Amazon, you won't make a difference.
No, not really. No.
Can you repeat the question?
No, I think we can. So the question was, how does the private cloud fit into that? And it's really, if you are building an internal S3 storage, then it's Ceph. And generally, you can remember that Ceph is more for cloud workloads, whereas Gluster is a little more suitable for container workloads and file workloads. That's the rough guideline. But even that is changing. You have another question?
Just a question about you split analytics into Hadoop, and Hadoop is...
Can you speak in the...
Hadoop is mainly an analytics cluster, so you can use it for data analytics use cases, and you split that. The one is yellow for Gluster storage,
yes,
and the other one is Ceph storage. Why?
So you're wondering about this one, and which other one?
Hadoop.
Hadoop. Yes. Okay. So there's a relatively new development where there is a connector to S3 once again, where you can build a data lake scenario where Ceph can host enormous amounts of data that can get involved in a Hadoop analytical situation. And there's actually a session here at the summit tomorrow, I think, I'm going to show the schedule later, where Neil Levine and Brent Compton are going to talk about such a use case. So Ceph can be really valuable for large-scale Hadoop implementations, in particular for those organizations that run multiple copies of that stack. So you can
join us again at the Partner Pavilion Theater for the next presentation. Juniper Networks, multi-cloud networking and policy management with Open Contrail, presented by DP Ayatavera, Director of Product Management.
Sorry.
Sponsored by Juniper Networks.
So we find that in organizations like retail businesses who rely on the information that they glean from doing these analytics, they have many copies of the stacks, the entire Hadoop ecosystem packaged up, and every time they want to do solve a new problem, they just stand up a new cluster and a new one and a new one, which is hugely expensive. And there's ways to actually use Ceph as a back-end storage and avoid some of the associated costs and have a shared data pool for those. The yellow here for analytics is for Gluster. There was a partnership with Hortonworks a couple of years ago, but the technology still works. You can use Gluster as an underlying storage and replacement for HDFS if you wanted to. Yeah. Next slide. So what can we actually do to help you with such a transition? And I'm going to state the obvious, but some of these things are not so obvious. First of all, we can give you tested and tried software with long-term support life cycles. And that is important because we see many take a big risk who just run the upstream bits, and then when they are in trouble, they come to us and ask for help. And sometimes we may not be able to help them. So if you have a serious application, if you want to put production data onto the system that you would get fired for if it gets lost, then maybe it's a good idea to work with Red Hat and use supported long-term bits instead. We will guarantee that in 2 to 3 years from now, you will still get a patch for that particular version, and we are going to help you out, which may not be the case if you're just using community bits. Red Hat publishes a whole array of reference architectures where you can read the reference architecture, let us say for Dell, for Cisco, for Quanta, for all the vendors of your choice. And you can read that, and if it fits your use case, brilliant. You just use it, order the hardware, you put it in production, and you can even predict what sort of performance you will get out of that. If you have a use case that doesn't fit exactly, or if your capacity needs are different, then you can work with us, and we are going to help you design your own more suitable solution. We have world-class support, and of course, you would expect this in this showcase, training and consulting. So if you are not already familiar with this technology, you absolutely should make use of that. I attended a session earlier this morning where Monash University presented their experience of adopting Ceph. They have been using this for the last almost 4 years, and they are very successful and very happy with the result. But they actually also emphasize that this is not technology that just gets deployed like that. You need to know what you're doing, and you need to have a very good understanding of hardware, of networking, and a very wide spectrum of things. It's not just a nice graphical user interface where you can push some buttons. And that actually goes further even when you operate such a solution. The error situations may be a little difficult at times, and you need to know what you're doing. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, both Ceph and Gluster are based on Linux, of course. So you need to have something underneath. So the platform on which they run is RHEL in this case. And cloud workloads tend to be more suitable for Ceph. Virtualization workloads with Rev, for example, if you deploy Rev, there's a very nice integration with Gluster. And as far as container goes, both of them are fine now. We have very nice and brand new integrations where you can have containerized Ceph and containerized Gluster based on your use case. Both of them may be very good solutions. Next slide. If you take a closer look at our ecosystem, here you have all the hardware vendors, and that is really where the savings occur. You can deploy this software-defined storage technology pretty much on any hardware. You pick your own vendor, your preferred vendor, and we can help you pick the bill of materials, which disks you should order, what the balance is of how many disks per node. We can help you with that, and then you just put the purchase order to Dell and have it shipped to your data center. But we also have many software partners, and it is an increasing list of other software that very nicely integrates with both Gluster and Ceph, where we even have certifications that they may be working with, let's say, a backup solution, where it is an appropriate and approved backup target for off-the-shelf backup software. So, growing list here, currently Citrix, Permabit, Percona. Next slide. And something that we are very, very proud of is what you see on this slide. In October 2016, for the first time, Red Hat was recognized by Gartner as a visionary, and again, this is a little hard to see from the back, I'm afraid, because the lines are not visible, but this is the usual quadrant model, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 quadrants in this chart, and you can see that Red Hat is actually one of the visionaries. Of course, we are not up here in this leader quadrant, because that is where the big guys are playing, who have been in this business for decades. So they have a big head start. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 or 3 years from now, we are going to be up here with them, because that is something that is just too visible already. That trend is visible. We see a lot of adoption, and the fact that even this meeting here today is so full and relevant shows that once again that we are getting there, and the current model that they are operating on is just not working on the long term. It's not sustainable, it's too expensive. So there is room for competition. Next slide. So a little bit, how much time do we have left? Let me quickly check. Okay, 5 minutes on a roadmap, how you introduce this. Next slide. This is an adoption curve over time, how you actually replace legacy storage technology with software-defined scale-out storage. And this red line here is your capacity growth that we talked about earlier, that for most of you is between 20 and 30%. So I think that's a pretty accurate display of your needs. So here's where we are today. If you have not adopted this technology, you have 100% legacy storage. So after you go home today, you will start thinking about it and get ready. Maybe you do a proof of concept, you play around with that technology. At some point, you hit this line here, which is when you are ready to adopt this, when you feel comfortable to actually put together a cluster and make it available for your colleagues. From that moment on, you can actually start replacing some of the new applications that you bring online and put them onto that new storage. Maybe you want to draw the diagram a little different and make a horizontal line here, because some people are very cautious and they don't want to touch the existing stuff. So maybe it's not going straight down, but there's a horizontal move for a while. But on the long term, hopefully in a couple of years, you will see a different mix where your legacy storage is really only there for these legacy applications that you don't want to touch. Just stay out of trouble, leave those in place. But for new applications, you actually base them on this new technology, which is good for those new workloads. Next slide. If you have seen any of the discovery sessions before, you have seen this model, which is our regular delivery framework, how Red Hat Consulting can help you discover use cases and problems, how we design a solution and deploy it, and then we keep iterating. And it works just as well for software-defined storage. I would like to point out one thing, though, is don't skip this piece, please. Don't just discover and then deploy something. I have customers on the phone every week who just call me and say, hey, can you help me to set up this new Ceph cluster? And of course we can, but my first question is always, what do you want to use it for? Let's spend a little bit of time talking about the use case, and then we are going to sit down together and design a solution that is much more adequate for that. Because when you design a software-defined storage solution, you have 1 million configuration choices to make. How many SSDs per hard drive? How much storage? How much main memory do you put in? What sort of CPU do you need in particular nodes? What is the network configuration? All of that needs to be carefully considered. Next slide. So that's kind of an end-to-end display of how this could go. So after today, for example, after this discovery session, you could decide to do a proof of concept. You should start training your storage architects. Some of them may be long-term veterans and they may be familiar with Hitachi, NetApp, EMC, but they may not be familiar at all with Linux administration and software-defined storage. So you need to retrain them so that they are a little more comfortable. Otherwise, it will be a battle to actually argue against them that they need to look at this new technology. So train your storage architects. Then you identify pilot adoption use cases. You design a storage architecture, as I just described. At some time, you also need to train your operators, and then you go and test and put it in production, and hopefully everybody will be happy. Next slide. I'm not going to explain all of these common mistakes one by one, but I will leave it up to you to read those. But once again, it reminds me of this morning's presentation of Monash University and the problems that they had. And they said Ceph is the most wonderful technology you can imagine. It recovers. He had a slide up there that said Ceph recovers from failures like a boss. It's true. It really recovers. It's great technology. But he also had a slide about the ugly perspective, which is that error messages are sometimes cumbersome and difficult to interpret, and debugging it can also be hard. And the way I think about this is we are in software-defined storage currently still at the stage where Linux was maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where a lot of geeks who are willing to invest the time, who get familiar with it, they get success and they love it. And they wouldn't trade it in for anything in the world. But for those who are not in that circle, it's a little difficult, and it's very difficult to break into that. So you need to be ready to invest into developing those skills. Next slide. What we can do to help you, my team specifically, as I mentioned, I run the storage consulting team. We have a number of standard situations where we have standard consulting offers. We can help you with designing a solution. We can help you to tune an existing cluster for more performance and find where performance bottlenecks are. We can help you doing migrations from other storage technologies towards Ceph or towards Gluster, as well as updates from one version to the other. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, unlike many other solutions, you can do an in-place update to new versions. How cool is that? So you can just leave everything running. You don't need to take it down. You don't need to notify your users. You can just one by one update each node, and they are compatible. The protocols are compatible. So it just keeps working until your final situation and the whole cluster is completely upgraded. Next slide. Where do you start after this? Inform yourself, get comfortable. I think that is the most important thing that you should take away from this. This is not rocket science. It can be done if you put your mind and energy behind it. Collect information, view YouTube videos, go to seminars. There's lots of storage-related sessions here at the summit. And the next slide will show you some of them. Yeah, go ahead. So these are all sessions that you can visit here at the summit that talk about Ceph or Gluster and that are very relevant. I would like to point out one of them, which is Ross Turk's presentation, Why Storage Matters for Your Digital Transformation. I'm mentioning this because it is the last presentation at the summit, at the very end of the agenda. And I want this session to be full because I've seen his slide deck. It's an amazing deck, and he's a terrific presenter. So if you have a chance, go and see this. This should be the last thing you take away from Summit. This is just a small number of reference customers and users of the technology that we have worked with over the last years. If you Google that, you will find references and white papers and customer statements, how they actually did it and what pitfalls they walked into. And some of them are actually here at the summit. If you want to talk to them, I would be happy to make introductions if you want to. Next slide. A little tool that I would like to point out is our savings calculator. You can find it at storagesavingscalculator.com. You can enter your particular use case about the capacity. So you put in how big is your storage need in your enterprise. You put in the growth rate that we analyzed. And you put in the cost per terabyte that you currently have. So some of you may be lucky and you have a great discount from your favorite vendor. Others maybe not so much. But you can put in your concrete data, and then it will compare it to some of our competitors, and it will show you how much money you could potentially save. And it produces a customized report that you get a PDF and you can print that. Very cool stuff. Last but not least, we have test drives. If you don't believe anything what I said, take a picture of those codes and you can get your hands on a test drive for Gluster and Ceph, where you get a fully working environment where you can play with those technologies, and it's free. It's right there. You can be up and running in 15 minutes. If you are slow like I am, then it takes maybe 20 minutes. But you can play with that technology and get comfortable even before you buy a bunch of hard drives and set up your own thing under your disk. Okay, next slide. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
What about security? Is there any issue with security?
Is there an issue?
How mature it is from a security point of view?
Yeah. Is there an issue with security? Yes and no. It certainly would be an exaggeration to say that it is super mature and has every line item covered. So if you did a one-by-one comparison, like many RFPs do, you will find that these software-defined storage open source packages seem to be lacking many of the features that the commercials had decades to implement. Nevertheless, I think if you do the right things and if you follow the documentation, you can build a reasonably secure implementation where you have encoding and encryption on the disks, where you have all your traffic properly encoded and encrypted, where it's very unlikely that somebody can break into it. But there's certainly a lot of catching up to do in order to get compliance certificates and all of that. So that is still work in progress. Any other questions?
So I have seen Ceph has been more of a CLI, command line based. So is there any web interface where we can manage stuff?
Yep. I'm glad you asked that question. Many people hate the command line interface. The gurus actually tend to like them. We find that the big adopters, they all build their own dashboards and their own integration into their DevOps instrumentation. But the good news is that we are working on a nice dashboard and nice user interface, and I thought I saw Jeff Applewhite somewhere in the back. Where did he go? He left. He is the guy responsible for that project. And later this year you should see something very nice that is easy to use, where it is more for the introductory users, that you can easily deploy new OSDs and take down others, and you visualize how full your cluster is, and you have some basic monitoring capabilities. There's an upstream a project called Tenderl, which implements most of that. So if you want to take a look at that, tendrl.com, or not .org, if you want to take a preview. This is what we are currently working on. Any other questions? If that's not the case, then I would like to thank you very much for your time.